my Toronto. VK on the beat. Check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get a city love. My city love me back for my city love.
Welcome to episode 1484 of Toronto Mic'd, proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free local home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team, the best baseball in the city outside the Dome. Join me on May 12th for the home opener. Be there, or be square. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. The Advantaged Investor Podcast from Raymond James Canada. Valuable perspective for Canadian investors who want to remain knowledgeable, informed, and focused on long-term success. Season 6 of Yes, We Are Open, an award-winning Moneris podcast hosted by FOTM Al Grego. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Today, making his Toronto Mike debut is Danny Kingsbury. Welcome, Danny.
Hey. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good to meet you. By the way, I always am conflicted. Like, we are meeting on Zoom, but are we meeting each other? Like, does this count as, oh, I met Danny Kingsbury?
I think it does.
I go back and forth on it. Like, I don't know. Like, well, can I tell people, yeah, I was hanging with Danny for, 90 minutes on Wednesday afternoon, even though this is, or Wednesday morning, whatever the heck this is, even though it's a Zoom, that counts?
Well, think of the alternate, right? Because it would have been, maybe a music week thing, and we'd have been shaking hands and say, "Hey, nice to meet you. How you doing? How's it going? When'd you get in? When do you leave? Where are you staying? What are you doing?" And then both of us would be looking over each other's shoulders to see if there's someone more important in the room that we could talk to. So I like this a lot better.
I've had that moment where somebody's got your attention, but you see in the corner of your eye, like somebody you really want to go talk to, but like, how do you pull off that move? Like, I'll be right back, or, that's tough, right?
No, it's a classic. I've been to enough cocktail parties over the years to someone's saying, "Hey, how you doing?" You don't care. "Hey, where you going?" You don't care. So and then it's like, "Hey, we have to grab a drink this week."
And that never happens, right?
No, it never happens, of course. So. But yeah, nice to meet you. Listen, like many people in the business, and I think you and I chatted a little bit about this. Like, so many people, like I know so many people who know so many people. Like, they're probably never mind the 6 degrees of separation. I'm probably good for. I'm going to narrow it down to 3. I could probably find anybody in 3 people, and I mean anybody in the business in Canada, anyhow. Right. So, and some are quicker. I said, "Oh, I would know this guy," and I could contact them, and then I would be in touch with them. So we're definitely like that. And I also, so you're obviously buddies and colleagues with Humble and Fred, and I know we're probably going to chat about them. So, but it's one of those. If I hear bad things about people from people that I like, I believe it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't usually say, "Well, I know you're saying that, but I'm going to make up my own mind." So I know that may sound a little bit shallow, but I trust people. I have a circle of trust of people, and if they say, "Oh yeah, great guy, Josh, he's great. Yeah, you guys would get along," like, and so that's good enough for me, particularly these days, right? It's like, yeah, no, that's good enough for me. If they like them, I do. So you're in that group. So that's great. And listen, I respect what you do, even though I see it from, arm's length. But yeah, I'm probably like many of your guests that say it's pretty impressive what you've accomplished. I mean, I have some questions for you before it's all said and done about what you're doing and how you're doing it and all that. But it's impressive. So
don't forget, I want to field your questions, but I wanted to say thank you for those kind words. I realize I like you already. Like, you open things up by talking about how great I am. That really appeals to me. So thank you.
Hey, listen, I'm many things, but not dumb.
So have you listened? Have you consumed any of the 1,483, because you're 84, 1,483 episodes of Toronto Mike?
I have probably consumed in total half dozen of them,
Oh,
and
that's it. That's a
that
low percentage.
I was going to say that that probably sounds like a negative or apathetic on my part, but I'm going to be brutally honest here, where um, I enjoy audio, right? I'm an audio guy. I love it. But the one thing I always find about spoken word audio
Mhm.
is that it needs your attention, right? Like you've got to, you can say, well, you can do other things while you're listening to spoken word audio. And I guess you can. I guess you could drive. I mean, that's it. But I mean, it really is a time thing for me. And those are some of the questions that I'm going to have for you later. But yeah. So listen, I've heard your show, and I've heard I've heard guests on it, and yeah, it's good. I mean, I like your style. It's very um, you do some research ahead of time, obviously, and which again is pretty impressive with that many guests. It's you should do some seminars for radio and teach talent how to do show prep.
Well, thank you. These are amazing, kind words. Listen, I wish you were here. So where are you? Are you in Ottawa? Where are you?
I am in the beautiful downtown metropolis of Renfrew, Ontario, which is 40 minutes from the Canadian Tire Center west.
How close to Ottawa are you?
Yeah, well, it's 40 minutes,
Oh,
right?
the
So
Canadian
it's
Tire Center. You know what? As I heard you say that, I thought you meant like it was a joke that that's how close you are to the nearest Canadian Tire store. Like,
no, the nearest Canadian Tire store is 4 minutes.
you know what, Danny? It's hard for us Torontonians to keep track of what that arena is being called these days. Like to me, it's the Corel Center, or like I feel like it's had a few names, right?
Yeah, well, it was. Let me try here. Palladium when it
Right.
started.
Right.
Corral Center.
Right.
Um, People will be yelling now. Say,
Something
okay, Corral Center.
between, yeah, something between Corel and Canadian Tire, I feel.
Yeah, darn. But yeah, it's been about four names, and it will. I'm sure will be another name when it ends up going downtown to LeBreton Flats.
Where
So
it always should have been. I used my former father-in-law lives in Ottawa, and I spent some time. And that drive to Kanata, like this is like if you put the Toronto Maple Leafs arena in Markham.
yeah. So if you're voicing spots for Ottawa in the future, always say Canada.
What did I say?
You
Kanata?
said Kanata.
Yeah,
Like, do you live in Canada or do you live in Canada? So just say
Canada.
Canada.
Okay,
Canada.
Canada.
So that aside, yeah, I don't know where it should have been built. I know that I lived in Stittsville, which was again, if 4 minutes from my house, so I could leave a hockey game, with 5 minutes left in the third period, and watch the end in my living room on television. So we were pretty close to it. And it was just, the reason you left early, because if you didn't leave early, you'd be an hour getting out because everyone parks. There's no mass transit. Like there are buses, but it's not like going to the ACC, right? I mean,
Right.
there's no infrastructure
No
to
one's
carry.
biking there, right? Like nobody bikes to the game in Canada.
Yeah, like you can't. It's. I mean, if it was downtown, a lot of people would probably bike, but it's literally. Let's do a miniature model of, let's say the hockey arena would be Oakville, right? So if you had to now, but the problem in Toronto, you could actually take a GO train out to
Sure. Sure.
Oakville, right? So there, I can't compare. Like it's this big arena
Right.
in the middle of nowhere, but in fairness, they built a lot of infrastructure around it. So in the early, like late '90s and early 2000s in Ottawa, it was really a tech town. I mean, it was really becoming a hub, and a lot of
Right.
startups were built here. And so there are a lot of those 6-story glass buildings that look like Silicon Valley, and they're dense-ish in area, but there are a ton of them. And then there were all these, startup company names across the top of them, and But that died off, but then it didn't. It's kind of come back. So that's really what it's like. You've got the arena out west, and then and you're in Canada, and then there's not a lot of, well, there wasn't a lot of housing built around it, but now they're starting to do that. So it's kind of a weird thing, but it's it's a nice arena. I always thought it was impressive, and we were lucky enough. When I was with Rogers, we were not lucky enough to have a private box there, which Harvey Glott actually bought before Rogers bought the radio station, because I don't think we'd have had it otherwise. But beauty, like right between the blue line and center ice, so perfect for concerts, perfect for hockey, and tickets were plentiful. It's not like the Leafs.
Right. All right, Danny, I'm going to warm you up now with some notes that came in when I announced on Twitter, the app formerly known as Twitter, that you were making your Toronto Mike debut. And then we're going to walk through this kind of wild radio career. And I have some spots I'm going to pester you with annoying questions. But the first note I want to read to you came in from Jeff Lumby.
Oh.
Jeff Lumby says you are one of his 2 all-time favorite program directors. Any kind words to say in return there? Now, the other gentleman who was just in the basement a couple of weeks ago is Scott Turner. So it's you and Scott Turner, his all-time favorite program directors. What was it like working with Jeff Lumby?
Okay, I did hear that episode because Lumby teed me up on that. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll hear that episode for sure. So what was it like working with Jeff Lumby? Well, maybe I should start. And, right up front, we go back. I mean, I met him the very first day that I started in radio, along with Dan Durant. So who was Dan Kingsbury. So I met them on the very first day I started in radio, which was January 1978, CKSA, Lloydminster, Alberta, -45. And those 2 guys were at the radio station. I was the new guy. And that's the day we met, and he made an impression right off the bat. Like he's such a dink. He's so great, right? Like he's always been a dink. Like he's just one of those. I had a Camaro back then. So now I had a 1976 Type LT Camaro, and it had sidebars. So you know what those are with the exhaust right there. So it was kind of loud, right? And it had wide tires in the back and all of that. So I thought it was pretty cool. And then I meet him, and he's got a little Honda Civic, and they were just out then, right? He had this gold Honda Civic. Right. And, he just looks at the car, and he's just like, what is that? That is like the cheesiest car I've ever seen. Like, just up one side, down the other, about how terrible it is to have a car like that. And only because he just thought it was gauche, right? He's just like, who has a car like that? I said, well, what kind of car do you have? Oh, I've got a Honda Civic. Honda Civic. So it kind of started like that. I mean, and we just argued all the time. And if I spoke to him last week, I guess, or a couple of weeks ago on something, and part of it would be shots of the call. Like it wouldn't be, oh, how are you? I love you. I miss you so much. I hope you're great. Blah, 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 blah. It's always, there's always something in there. There's something, some kind of dig. So that's how it started. And then, I mean, we'd be here a long time, going over the years on that. But yeah, look, he's a guy, he's really special to me. And I know and no matter what I say, he'll take it with, coming from me, right? Like he's set in his own ways. He's made great strides and been very successful. And his wife is just a doll, and she's very successful. And so they have done well in their careers, and he's done it all really by kind of being a dink as well, right? Like, and I mean that just like he's very set in his ways. He's not, compromise is not his middle name, right? So if he's set on something, that's the way it is, and he's really not. And it's worked for him. It's been absolutely fantastic. So we kind of went our separate ways, if you will, in radio, but we always stayed in touch. Which, as a sidebar, is really interesting. Do you ever think about, I don't think you weren't around back then in those late 70s, but you ever think about like how did we communicate back then, right? Because it was just a phone, and that's it, right? Like it was just a landline. Like so how did we keep in touch with people? I guess it was just on the phone, but I don't even have this memory of, oh yeah, I would call him, but I must have, right? It's not like,
You
well, I
did
would
you write
text them.
letters? I mean, I do go back, but I was quite young in the late 70s. But like you could write letters, right? I know my buddy did like a program where he went to I think he went to France, sort of like where Lumbee is right now. He went to France, like an exchange program. He went there for a year, and we would exchange letters, like snail mail. And then if you could phone people, but mainly you kept in touch with people you could geographically like visit their homes. Like he would knock on their door and be like, "Hey, you want to go grab a
Yeah,
beer or whatever." Yeah.
but you also needed to pay. This is going to sound really bizarre, so I'm kind of puking here a little bit. But it's like, imagine back then when you want. If I was in Lloydminster and he moved back to Saskatoon,
Hmm.
and I wanted to call him, like it would be long distance.
Oh yeah, it's
I have to find
expensive.
a phone. Yeah, I got to find a phone that would pay for a long distance call.
Right.
Anyhow, we stayed in touch. Dan Duran, same thing.
Okay, so what was Dan Duran like? Here, we'll walk. I've now changed my mind. I'm going to walk through it a little chronologically, and when it's appropriate, I'll read these nice notes I got for you. But I want to know, like what made you want to get into radio? And then I need a little tidbit because Dan Duran does appear on the Humble and Fred show, the podcast, which I produce. So literally tomorrow when I pop on the show, because I pop on Thursdays at like when Dan Duran shows up to do his news, I pop on. So I'll see via Zoom. I'll see Dan tomorrow. But what kind
Okay.
of guy was Dan when you first met him? Pre Duran, I suppose.
He was. I don't think he's changed a bit. Like unlike Lumbee, I think Dan was. He probably broke something the first day I met him, and he probably was carrying a stack of carts, like for commercials, and they probably fell on the floor, and a couple of them probably broke, right? Like that was Dan, but he was the most likable guy, ever. Just a big, you know, he was a big boy, Dan Duran, and yeah, but I didn't even know him as Duran. I don't even call him that anymore. I still call him Geeb, so
Sure.
Geeb. But yeah, so met him. Really, terrific guy. Same thing, and we hit it off the same way, but not exactly. We don't have as long a professional life, professional work cycle as I have with Lumbee, but yeah, Dan had I remember his car too. It's weird back then, right? We were 20 years old, and I'll get into how I met them. But
Sure.
yeah, he had a Toyota Corolla 4-speed. I had Pasquale, which was the Camaro, and Lumbee had his gold Honda. So great stories about Dan and his car. But so I thought he was the sweetie, and I still think that.
Well, if I
Uh,
may, so it sounds wild to me that in this Westminster, how big is that? Is that a town? Is that a city? That's how large a market are we talking about here?
you really are from Toronto, right? Hard to tell. Okay, first of all, it's Lloyd
Oh,
Minster.
shit. Okay. Lloydminster. My
Okay.
apologies. Okay.
No, don't apologize. It's just this is who I am. So
Not Westminster. That's another place. Okay, Lloydminster, because only to set you up here is that in this small little market in 1978, you've got yourself, of course, you will go on to do some really cool stuff we'll talk about, and you got great pipes too. I'm hearing it in the headphones. But you got Jeff Lumbee, who would go on to be famous for voiceover work, and he's in the Red Green Show and he's had a great radio career, and now he's retired in France, as I mentioned. And then you got Dan Duran, who was on national television because of his voice, doing lots of voiceover work. He's in lots of big movies, usually playing the Anchorman or something like that. But
usually,
yeah, but that's kind of interesting that all that comes out of this Lloyd Minster.
yeah. Well, it gets even better with Moose Jaw, but so how I got into radio was quite. Do you want to head
Yeah,
there, or want me
yeah,
to
let's
keep
do that.
talking about Geeb?
No, let's do
So
Dan, by the way,
so
famously, so Lumby's been on a few times, and Humble's been on many times, and Fred has been on many times. I mean, on Toronto Mike, of course. Kind of famously in the Humble and Fred show, discussion arena, Dan Duran won't do this. So Dan won't come over and face my annoying questions for 60 to 90 minutes. So I'll never get the story of Dan Duran. But
and that doesn't surprise me, to be honest with you. It's because I don't find Dan to be that kind of guy. Like I'm going to sit down, talk about myself for 90 minutes. Like he's not. He's still more of a question asker, right? He's a talker, but he's so curious. He wants to know everything all the time. So So I didn't know those guys. I was born and raised in Edmonton. All I ever did, I was a shoe shine boy, which was my first job ever. I was probably 13 years old. And then I got a job in a restaurant while I was going to school. And I got a job in the kitchen in the restaurant. And then I worked, in a kitchen and I worked with some really great chefs back then. So this would have been 76, 77, 70, 75, 76, 77. And I didn't even know I was working with great chefs at the time. And then in high school, I took cooking, because I went to a technical school. I didn't have the grades. So, but I was doing cooking. I was making a living as a cook, but I was buddies with someone. His real name is Bruce Hammond, and his radio name is Jay Hamilton. So we worked at the restaurant business, and he was a waiter. I was a cook. Life was good. We partied hard, but he wanted to get into radio. I said, "Oh, I love radio. I grew up listening to 630 Ched in Edmonton. I mean, from the 60s, right? I'm just, as early as I can remember, I love music, like just absolutely love music. And my mother loved music, still does. And so we'd have the little transistor radio. It's going to sound cliche, and I apologize for that, but it is really true. You'd go into our kitchen and, the Beatles would be on the AM radio. And I'd go, "Oh, this is the most coolest thing ever." And then, all this cheesy pop music, but then the Rolling Stones would be on. And I had an older sister, still do. And then I had an older brother who's passed, but they were sort of rockers, right? So, we would get Led Zeppelin 3 for Christmas. And then, we'd fight over it, right? Like, because we only had one stereo, and then fighting over an album, you'd scratch it. And I would get Steppenwolf Monster for my birthday, which is Boxing Day, Lumbie's birthday, by the way, as well. So anyhow, just love music. And I was just subjected to everything from the Association, to Led Zeppelin, to Pink Floyd, to you name it. So I'm really, I'm not one of those music snobs. And that's where it's not that we wouldn't get along because of that, but one thing I do know about you know a shitload about music, like really encyclopedic. And a lot of your guests know a shitload about music, encyclopedic. I know a shitload about music, but only the emotional part of it. Like, oh, I love that song. And if we did a little game one night, had a couple pops, and we had, we've got my old iPod here, and I've got 4,000 songs on it, I think. And if you click this, you just start the song, like within 3 seconds, I will name the artist and the title. It's just one of those, it's an ear thing with me. Now, if you say, well, who did they play with? And what songs did they write? And where would they go on to? I'd be like, I'm not 100% sure about that. I just know I know the song, I know the success, and my ears, sonically, I've got it. So, music lover, listen to the radio, went crazy over the radio. I just loved 630 Ched. They would do, had great announcers. Wes Montgomery in the morning show, Bruce Bowie was there, Chuck Chandler was there, Bob McCord was there, Brad Phillips, who we became, I met him very early in the game as well, and he went on to do a few good things at Chorus, and so I just loved listening to KJ, Keith James, and I just kind of dreamed, wow, I just can't imagine doing that for a living. But as it turns out, my buddy Jay Hamilton got a job, and he at CKSA Lloydminster, because he took the Columbia School of Broadcasting, and it was a correspondence course. And as absolutely ridiculous as it sounds right now, it was kind of cool. You get the manila envelope in the mail, right? And there'd be a blank cassette in it, and it probably was a Sonic, it wasn't a Maxell cassette, it was cheap cassette. And I think as part of your entrance fee, or to take the course, your tuition, they sent you like a little crappy cassette player, right? Play and record, and you do your tapes on there. So anyhow, so he takes that course, and then he kind of teaches it to me. Okay, so and it would be everything from okay, here's lesson 1. Here's what you need to do. And some of the lessons, even to this day, I still tell young announcers, and really a lot of it is about diction, right? And don't be lazy mouth. Don't be lazy mouth. And there's a way to, kind of get better at speaking more clearly. And I'm kind of doing it now. So when you're in a car, read the billboard out loud. When you're reading the newspaper back then, read a couple of articles out loud and slowly and over enunciate. And the funny thing is, if you do that, anyone listening to this or anyone who sees this, if you actually do that exercise and then 1 minute later speak, you'll say, hey, you know what? That actually worked. I'm not as lazy mouth as I was before. And also, and it really had little to do with, how deep your voice is. It really is just about, enunciation. And then I always use the line, look at if I checked once, Pavarotti was in the dressing room before he went on in Rome to play at the Coliseum. And you know what he was doing? He was warming up. So if it's good enough for Pavarotti, the best singer in the world, it's good enough for you as an announcer. Do your exercises, warm up before you broadcast, right? So that some of that, the Pavarotti story wasn't in there, but the Columbia School of Broadcasting, that's the kind of stuff that they taught. And then you got to read commercials, which I would pay money for now, to see them and then to hear them. But so he took that course, he taught it to me, he got a job, he left that job, and guess where he got the job? In Lloydminster, which, by the way, is 2.5 hours out of Edmonton. It's east out of Edmonton, by the way. So
shout out to Edmonton, who in this calendar year alone has won as many playoff rounds as my Maple Leafs have won in the last 20 years. That's a fact.
Well, I got to move to Edmonton and move back to Edmonton at my favorite station that I grew up listening to, 630 CHED, in 1979, the inaugural year of the Oilers. Previous to that, I was an Edmonton Eskimos fan. I know they're now the Elks, but it's really hard to change that. But it is the CFL, so nobody even knows what I'm talking about. But anyhow, so growing up in Edmonton, like Edmonton Football Club was like, oh my God, it was just the Eskimos, winning all these great. They were always winning, and then you move, and then all of a sudden the Oilers are there, and I'm not, this isn't name dropping at all. It's just the truth.
Oh, drop names.
So, Wayne Gretzky,
yes.
Pick them. We did a contest with Wayne Gretzky where you have breakfast with one of the listeners.
Yeah.
And his agent was Mike Barnett at the time, and he was on ProStar cereal boxes, right? So I was the promotion guy, Chad. Like, so Wayne wants to do breakfast with a fan. I said, great. So then we'll do the morning show. We'll take the Chad morning show over to his house. Wayne will show up. He'll sign autographs. We got pro stars. Blah, 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 blah. So we do this contest, and I mean, it was incredible, right? It was absolutely incredible. And then that morning, I had to go pick up Gretzky at his condo on River Road in Edmonton.
Wow.
And I remember, buzzing at his condo. All of a sudden, yeah, I go, hi, good morning, Mr. Gretzky. It's Danny Kaye from Shetty. Come on up. I'm just like, come on up. What do you mean? Come on up. So I go up. He's there. He's got the towel in his hand. Where are we going? I said, oh, by the way, congratulations on winning the Stanley Cup last week. What am I doing here, right? Oh. What's wrong with this picture? Anyway, I tell them the whole thing. We drive over. It's just, I mean, like those were the days when we want to talk about, the NHL and the players and being close to the community. And so guys like Mark Messier, Coffey, Curry, Kevin Lowe, Grant Fuhr, these guys would come to the station, Glenn Anderson, they'd all come to the station and, kind of like, hey, do you guys got any concert tickets? Like they're all like they're 18 years old. They're 18.
But like Danny, just think about that. Like you have your direct connect with Edmonton Oilers, Stanley Cup champion Edmonton Oilers. By the way, I'm going to drop River Road on my wife tonight because she was born and raised in Edmonton, and she likes to remind me it's the city of champions. So, I'm going to say, hey, do you know where River Road is? I'm going to do that thing. But like, imagine today, I tried to get Brendan Shanahan on Toronto Mike because he's a Mimico guy. And I was just, we went to the same high school. I just wanted to talk about, Lakeshore and Mimico and New Toronto and like that whole scene. And I had to go through so many layers of PR at MLSE to have it finally rejected. Like you're able
Right.
to, hey, you know, can I come on up, Danny?
Yeah, and I was just there. Well, I'll be down here, and we rented a limo, and he hit the buzz. Right? Yeah, come on up. I'm like, okay.
Right.
So, but it was these were young guys who were living the life. I mean, they were living the life. Trust me. Like there were really good nightclubs in Edmonton, still are, I'm sure. But so they were living the life, but they were just kind of normal guys. And then all of a sudden, they just started becoming fantastic, great, right? So. So yeah, it was that kind of stuff, like with the being at Ched and being exposed to all that stuff. But it just didn't seem like a big deal back then. We did so many great things at Ched. So many. I worked for a guy named Pat Bond, who you may have heard of. He was the PD then. He was just amazing program director and super creative. And worked for a guy named Vern Trail, who was just, I mean, these radio guys that I was exposed to. They were old school guys, right? Like Vern was for sure. And they taught you more about life than radio, and radio was pretty simple. Just, have fun.
So is it Lloydminster, then Edmonton?
It was Lloydminster, then Moose Jaw.
Moose Jaw. And that's where you meet, is that where you meet Humble Howard Glassman?
You are correct, sir. So I was there. I was in Lloydminster for maybe January till September that year. And then I got a job in Moose Jaw, and Dan and I, Duran, we just gotten an apartment in Lloydminster, so it took like several months. So we finally got an apartment, and then I said, "Oh, Dan, geez, I got a job at CHAB," and he's like, "Oh, it's okay, no problem." So I moved there, and I moved there as an announcer. I was an announcer at CKSA, and I was an announcer at CHAB, and Pat Bond actually hired me there, and I'll never forget the negotiation. He said, "Yeah, how much money do you make?" I said, "Well, right now I just got a raise. I'm at $550 a month." He goes, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." Okay, but it is fine because why I wanted to work at CHAB was because that was a Moffat station, and Moffat was a family-owned, radio company, and their headquarters were in Winnipeg, but they owned stations. They were mostly Western back then. They did buy Jam in Hamilton. So they had Moose Jaw CHAB, Calgary had CKXL, and all these AMs, like late 70s powerhouses, right? I mean, big, it's crazy to think of now. Big audiences, big cumes. So they had Edmonton, Ched, they had Vancouver, which was LG and CFox at the time. So, and then Winnipeg, they had CKY and City FM. So everyone wanted to get to Moose Jaw because that was their training ground.
Right.
And companies, I mean, I don't know if we'll ever go back here, but companies can learn a lot by that model, where you hire people from Lloydminster or from Rosetown or from Prince Albert or from anywhere, any small town, with a grain elevator, who's got an all-night show and the DJs are in there flipping records, right? Hire those guys if you think they've got potential, bring them to Moose Jaw, teach them exactly how it's done in those big markets, leave them there for a year, start them on the all-night show and let them leave doing afternoon drive. And then we'll hire, next time we have an opening, which we always do in those other markets, hire them. So it was really a training ground for a lot of announcers. And the list of people that went through Moose Jaw, wow, like pretty incredible. So I go to Moose Jaw, I meet Howard.
Danny, so I want to hear more about Howard here, but today that Moose Jaw station would just simulcast Roz and Mocha from Toronto.
I know where you're going with that, and yeah, you're probably right what it does, but I know that that's a very there are a few operators. One of them is Golden West, and I believe that's who owns them now, Golden West Broadcasting. Still a few operators, like independent guys, family guys, who still run their smaller market stations like they're supposed to be run. And boy, you'll be shocked to hear this. They're successful in their markets, right? Because they're doing it the way radio was meant to be done. You're supposed to service the community that you're licensed to service, be local, live in the community, know the people who run the businesses, be a member of the Kiwanis, or be part of the community,
right,
and you'll be successful in those smaller markets if you do that. So, but yeah, right now, and I know they just celebrated their 100th anniversary, CHAB AM, like maybe last year or whatever. So good that they're on the air, and they do have an FM now. But you're right, and I know where you're going exactly. And that part that's the part that just frustrates the heck out of me. It's just all of these companies bought all these small market stations, and they bought them for girth, right? Like they bought them because we want to go from 40 to 70 stations. But what they've become is, and each of those small market stations had a manager and a sales manager and had a morning show that lived in the marketplace, hired people. There was some good training grounds there, and everybody lived and worked in the community. And so because of it, they were all pretty much successful. But once you start getting rid of the managers in the market and the sales managers in the market, and it's a computer, with programming from another market. I mean, the station, maybe it sounds a little better than having local guys on, but it doesn't connect to the community. So Moose Jaw, when I got there,
this conversation is very enlightening because you're filling in a few gaps here. So, for example, you've got Humble Howard and Moose Jaw at this Moffat station, of course, and now I learned from you now that company also owns Seafox in Vancouver, where Humble Howard will end up, right?
Right.
So, it's all kind of. And now, is it you who introduces Howard to Dan Duran?
Yeah. So I got to Moose Jaw first,
right?
And Howard was there, and again, he'll laugh at this, but he was kind of a dink. He was kind of a, yeah, I'm Humble Howard. You know what I am? You know what my first job was? I was announcing at Zellers. I was doing hello Zellers, the shoppers. This is Humble, and his dad owned a clothing store right downstairs from the radio station. And and he was like, oh, who's this guy? Who's this Kingsbury guy coming in here trying to think he's something from Lloydminster? And I'm literally, I was way too early in the biz to look at people like that and go, well, you're kind of a dink. I just what I said at the top. I said, if I like you because somebody else said you're okay, that's kind of, I think I still am. I'm pretty trusting. I'm pretty open, right? Like, and I've been hurt because of it, Mike, because I'm being so trustful of people. People have hurt me.
But this dink, eventually you would recruit this. We'll get to this because we're going to spend a bit more time once we get you to Toronto, obviously. But assuming you get there. But at some point you do recruit Humble Howard to be a part of the CFNY morning show. So this is in 1989. So you must have seen some great talent there.
Yeah, well, you know what? There's a lot of water running between Moose Jaw and CFNY in 1989 for sure. Because he and I did become really, really close in Moose Jaw as well. Great guy, we really hit it off. And then Duran, and I can't completely recall how Dan got to the station, but Lumbee eventually got to the station as well. And I know when Dan got there, it was shortly after I got there, because we actually rented a house. Are you ready? 759 Hochelaga Street East in Moose Jaw. So Dan and I had this house, and it was party house. And I had these huge Marantz speakers, like the size of grand pianos, and we would just party like hard. And Howard was part of that. Of course, he lived at home because his parents lived there.
Right.
So yeah, he was great. We became great friends. He became Saskatchewan's most humble disc jockey. He became Humble Howard. He was the evening guy. Pat Bond gave me the drive show at CHAB, and Howard was pissed off. He was just like, how does he get the drive show? Oh, it's unbelievable. He's only been here a couple months. Why is he getting the show? But he got over that. We became great friends. And so yeah, then I ended up getting a job at Ched. So again, the phone call comes. Okay, we need an overnight weekend guy at Ched. I'm like, okay, sure. And then I remember it was Chuck McCoy who hired me and said, okay, what are you making? I said, I'm making $1,000 a month now. And he goes, oh, okay, well, we can handle that. I never get a raise, Mike. I never get a raise.
Well, you have to lie. When they ask you that question, you have to lie.
I know. I know now, but I didn't know that then. But listen, I'd have taken a pay cut to go to Chad. Are you kidding me? That was my hometown, my radio station. I just, oh my God, it was just such heaven. I don't know if I was ever happier. Well, there were times for sure, but certainly professionally, that was such a great time. And then Howard stayed at CHAB for a while, but he ended up going to CFox, like overnight at CFox. And he, had success there. Same thing. He took his shtick out there, humble Howard. And I'm going to have trouble with the years on it, but then I know he moved to Calgary to work for Kick out there. So, but again, we always stayed in touch, and I remember flying out to Vancouver to visit Howard and at CFox and going into on Richard Street and LG 73, and Schaefer was out there. Don Schaefer was there, and yeah, it was just really. Again, now I think back and say, wow, how lucky can a guy get? I mean, to the things that I was exposed to. And I'm not suggesting I took it all for granted, but it really became kind of, this is the way it is, right? Like, this is the way it is. Like, you get to meet all the stars, you get to meet all the celebrities in the business, and it's no big deal. You want to have a Papa Burger somewhere, right? So it's just not like that now at all, right? So Howard does his thing. Dan, I think, went directly to Calgary, and I think from Moose Jaw, and he was at Kick as well. So those guys worked together there. And then I stayed at Ched, so I can pick it up here a little bit. So Lumbee is, I think that's when he moves. No, then Lumbee moved to Edmonton at K97. So Danny Kaye was at Moose Jaw, Humble Howard was at Moose Jaw, Dan Duran was at Moose Jaw, and Jeff Lumbee was at Moose Jaw. And then all four of us would be gone in a year or two, right? So I'd go to Edmonton, Lumbee went to Edmonton, and Howard to Vancouver, and then Calgary, and then Dan to Calgary. So, and again, we'd always stay close, always stay, together, and always.
Well, it is wild considering, soon we'll get you to Toronto, and then I'll have a whack of questions about be it CFNY or Q107. Yeah. But it is wild, those names, how they're all there at that one moment, and then how they all kind of intersect for the rest of their professional careers to a point where and again, I'm going to insert myself there, this guy who was never part of the scene at all, never worked a day in radio, but I'll be producing a Humble and Fred podcast episode, and on that episode will be Humble and Fred. Dan Duran will be on to introduce things, and our guest will be from France, will be Jeff Lumbee. Like, everybody will be broadcasting together today in 2024. Like, it is a mind blow there. But please get Danny Kingsbury to Toronto, because then I can start annoying the heck out of you.
Okay, so in Moffat, you kept moving up. So I was 6 years at Ched and loved it. I met my wife in Edmonton. We've been married 43 years this summer.
Congrats. I also married an Edmonton woman, so we have this in common.
Oh, there you go. We'll have to talk about that. So now she's not an Edmontonian, but I met her there. So, gotcha. But anyhow, we had our firstborn there. And then I got a job in Winnipeg as a program director. My first job as a program director in 1985. I went to City. Can I
read a note? I mentioned I'll interject with notes as they're appropriate, but this note came in from a fellow FOTM, because Danny, you're now an FOTM, a friend of Toronto Mike. So
nice.
Everyone but Dan Duran's in this club now. Okay. This note came from Sharon Taylor.
Okay.
She writes, Danny has had a pretty incredible career. He worked across the hall from me in Winnipeg and in Toronto. I was the GM to his PD at KISS, which we'll get to later when you get to Toronto. He's solid. So that note comes in from Sharon Taylor.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, listen, I got lots of time for Sharon too, for all the same reasons. Like, I always thought she was an amazing, she's talented, aggressive, knew lots of people, really, wanted to get stuff done. And I respect her so much, because I look back now and it's like, oh my God, what was it like being a woman in radio back then? Right? And I mean, when I say back then, I mean even 2000s. Like, it wasn't good. Like, it wasn't, and I'm not doing the, it was just not it was not great, you know, like there were not many women in the business, and there were not, you know, and the ones that were, like, I'm sure didn't have it easy, you know, like, but Sharon was one of those, because she was good and because she was not timid. She said what she meant and was thinking. So she got, you know, I think she, you know, she was maybe disrespected by people because of that, but I only respected her. I thought she was great. So yeah, and so yeah, she was there at AM at CKY, did great promotions there. And when I went to City, I mean, this is kind of where it starts for me. I kind of call myself kind of the cleanup guy. Oh, like, I'm trying to think of a character, you know, in a series of something, you know, where. So when I went to City, City was a super heavy rock and roll station. Bro Jake had left; he was there, and then he moved to go to Halifax, I think, and then moved from Halifax to Toronto at Q107.
Shout out to John Gallagher.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
we'll get to him later. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So when I got there, I was like this music loving kind of, you know, not a top 40 guy, but just a music loving guy, right? Like, I wasn't a rock guy, I wasn't a disco guy, I wasn't an AC, I wasn't a country. I just liked radio. I liked all kinds of music, and so the company absolutely wanted City. They wanted to reposition it, and it was just really at the time when Chum FM went from sort of their AOR would not be fair, but they were very they were a little more eclectic, right? Like, Chum FM was kind of the, you know, maybe what inspired Marsden to, you know, to do some things with CFNY, maybe, I don't know. But anyhow, they turned into a kind of a combination, right? Like, the hot AC would be the word, but Roger, Rick, and Marilyn were there, and so they evolved the station. And I think, you know, Moffat and many other, and by the way, shot right up, you know, in the ratings, right?
Right.
So I think Moffat had some thoughts about, you know, we could probably mainstream City a little and make it more successful than it was. So who gets to go in there and do that? Well, it's me. Oh, great! My first BD job. I was like, what's, 27 years old, 26 years old. And again, just didn't know shit from Shinola, right? It was just one of those things where I go in there, and I was working for a guy named Roy Hennessy, and then Jim McLaughlin was the running Moffat, and Chuck McCoy was the national PD. So Chuck, Chuck's always been my guy as well. You know, he did so much for me in my career. But they figure, you know, and I remember going back and saying, you know, I really didn't know what I was doing back then. And they're like, yeah, that's why we brought you there, because, you know, it's, you know, within the first 2 weeks, you'd be like, oh no, we can't do this because they've been doing it like this for years, right? They said we knew you'd go in, we'd do the plan, and you would execute it. I'm like, all right, sounds good to me. So we had some really good success in the first year and a half of that, and that's when I hired Lumbee, so to do the morning show in Winnipeg. So he was at City FM there, and I hired him from LA. He was in a adult entertainment facility doing disc jockey work there, introducing adult entertainers.
Wow.
And yeah, and he was listening to Rick Dees and Kiss FM and all those LA radio stations. So he got his head filled with a lot of really cool ideas, and he had lots of energy. And this was my first PD job, so I could hire him, and like, okay, yeah, that's great. And actually, I was on the morning show with him for about a year. So it was myself, Lumbee, and a guy named Terry Clausen. And it was a pretty good show. I really have to admit, I was the pilot, and those guys were the real talent, but I could kind of keep it moving. And so meet him there, and it's all great. Now, so here's the get ready for the first ass kick in your life, right? And it really was for me. It was literally, so the city was, you know, there was a portion of the city of Winnipeg who was really pissed off at City because, see, is this going to sound familiar where we're going? So there was a core audience that really, you know, really did want to blaze, you know, 24/7 on that station. And the company's like, but I don't think, you know, we can rock, but let's don't and and this is what I mean now, getting into the nuance of music. I mean, I get slaughtered in those conversations, right? Because I don't really want to go there, and I'm not really that interested. I just know I like rock music, I like heavy rock music, I like Metallica, but I also like Pavarotti. You know what I mean? So it's just to kind of get you in my head a little bit for music. I'm not, I was born and raised, and I did this, and I've got card X's. Now
What
I
you're
do have
telling us is you're no Ivor Hamilton. That's what you're telling us.
bingo or Alan Cross, right? I mean,
Of course.
there were enough musicologists. Well, Ivor isn't fair because I never worked with him,
Right.
but I worked with enough people who knew a ton about music. It's like, no, I don't need
By
some
the
of
way,
that
Alan
stuff.
comes from Winnipeg as well.
He does, and he was there when I was there, so he was at Q94.
Right.
The sound of feeling good, Q94. Hi, this is Alan Cross.
And just yesterday,
So
just to bring it all full circle, I was hanging out with Rob Johnston, yesterday at the Chorus Key building just for a tour.
okay,
I just walking around taking pictures and checking it out, like because I was going on a bike ride anyway, so I went to Sugar Beach to do that. And of course,
nice.
I think I put on Instagram the picture. I said technical production by Robbie J. Like, and everybody who reads that hears it in Alan's voice. So
Right,
really
right,
cool.
right. So the city kind of was pissed off at portions of city for what we did to it. So we tried to, and even at the time now I think back about this, where even though we were still playing rock music, we were playing contemporary music as well, but it had to cross pollinate. Do you remember the R&R magazine?
Not really, no.
It was called Radio and Records. So it had to cross pollinate, like if a song, and by the way, music was changing then, right? In the mid 80s, it was definitely starting to change. So on the top 40 chart, there would be bands like Springsteen and Tears for Fears and Cutting Crew and all that stuff. But they would also be on the rock charts, right? So it was really like, oh, look at this crossover. So I think that was the plan, was to play the crossover rock music, right? So yes, it's on the rock charts, but it's also popular. It's a Billboard hit. And we can get into regs, which is another reason why I went to CFNY, I'm sure. But so we had to comply back then. So there was just a lot of different regs. So anyhow, we put the station together. It's a lot more contemporary. It's a lot more accessible, and the ratings went way up. I mean, we broke 200,000 cume, after our first year, which is big in Winnipeg,
Right.
and everything was great except Westcom at the time, which was WIC. They're like, well, there's a big hole now for rock music, and so we're going to turn rock. But I say the collective we're like, well, the CRTC regulations only licensed one rock station in Winnipeg, so they may want to go rock, but they can't. Whoops. Yes, they did.
Oh.
Now they had eight or 10 years of regulatory grief for doing that.
Right.
But I credit that station for kind of changing the Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4 regulations, or at least spearheading it, right? So they turned rock, not heavy rock like City was, but they played really good rock. I mean, it was Tom McGoran was the music director, and they were really starting to get some, they're playing some like a lot of classic rock and some current rock as long as it fit. And so we're like, I don't think they can do that. Like, they're out of compliance, right? So, and then all of a sudden, Brother Jay comes back to do mornings. Okay, so basically that was the sledgehammer, right? So, I mean, we went from, these numbers aren't exact, but they're going to be good enough for comparative purposes. So let's say City, when I got there, was a 5. It went to a 10 share. And then, what were the CKIS was a 3, and they went, to 9, and City goes back to a 5. So just think about that, right? We just got our asses kicked,
Right?
And it's like, okay, well now the company, a couple things we can do. So, and this part's fun. It's okay. So this was a good plan. It was working until it didn't. Now what are we going to do? So I think that's the key, right? Okay. So now what? What are we going to do? So we decide on the corporate side, the Moffat side, which was great. Well, we'll put the pressure on them at the CRTC level. And honestly, the company won that battle. The CRTC said, yes, you guys are out of compliance. And as I said, they went for years, in regulatory hell. Like, honestly, it was just, we could do another podcast on the whole thing about whether or not the Beatles' Twist and Shout was a Group 1 or a Group 2 record, right? So anyhow, so they got caught there, and then they hired a guy in town called his radio name was Lamont Hollywood, and Todd Freifogel was his name, and his brother Gord Freifogel was in the marketplace. So we decided, okay, they're kicking our ass, but we're also going to hammer them from a regulatory perspective. Then hire Lamont Hollywood. Like, why did Lamont cross the road, did the promotion? He comes over, does afternoon drive, and we played rock music again. Again, not all welding music, but tons of classic rock. It was definitely, there was no more Starship, if you will. We built this city. It was all, Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, really familiar, good rock music. Bring Hollywood over, Lamont Hollywood over, and wouldn't you know? So we went from a 5 to an 11, and Kiss went from a 10 to a 3 again. And okay, life's good again. Everything's fantastic. So that was 4 years. I've just
okay,
condensed into 10 minutes. Okay,
that's okay, because I got to get you to CFNY, because then
which is next.
With you. Okay, awesome.
So I was rewarded with going to an 11 share on City with a pink slip from one of my buddies. By the way, it's the first time ever I got the gate. I'm like, oh my God, this is. Now I have a kid. I have well, this is really bizarre. And so I was out of work, and then there was a circuit. But I was out of work, but I had kind of a decent set of connections, people, and they flew me in for the CFNY job, which was open. So this was February '89 when I was out of City, and then Jim Fonger, Bill Hutton, and Doug Pringle fly me into Toronto, and I was flying in there. I was just like, oh boy, I'm not in Lloydminster anymore, right?
Right.
So the exact same thing. I mean, I didn't really know much of the history of CFNY. I didn't. I would read about it in RPM or, the Record, whatever. And I sort of knew what was going on, and I knew that companies were now collapsing or consolidating and trying to buy different stations. So I was aware of that. But they fly me in, and they're, they were very, they were great. I mean, they were just like, look at, you're a great guy, you're a great program director. There's nothing, and there was no reason, that I got the gate, except for probably the guy. But so lo and behold, I get the gig. Right? And there's a great story that they flew me in for an interview, spent the day there and an overnight, and then they flew me back about 2 weeks later for a final interview, and it was a Friday afternoon. And I have my final interview, and then I walk out into the it was at Selkirk building, and I walk out, and Greg Simpson's in the lobby. I don't know if you know him, or like he's since passed, but he's there, and he was at FM 96 in London, and I didn't know him, but so he goes in for the last interview. I was the second last interview, and then I get the call. By the time I got home, flying home from Toronto, there was a call. My wife said, "Oh, you got a phone call from Toronto." I called, and they said, "Do you want the job?" I said, "Yes." Hang on 1 second. You want to move to Toronto? No, me neither. But we'll take it. Yes, that'll be great. Took the job. So that was I ended up starting there early April. So and I think Scott posted something about when I got that job. I think he's like, I was actually there till the next February. So even though McLean Hunter took it over in September, I was still there. So why did I get that job?
Oh, let me
It
okay,
was.
so let me just before you dive in there, just to give some context. So at this, it sounds like you're not too familiar. You have a little idea of what was going on when David Marsden was the PD and what CFNY, the Spirit of Radio, was all about. But then, of
Yeah.
course, when Marsden leaves, many will argue that's when the Spirit of Radio, departs, if you will. But then Don Burns, I believe, was the program director after, if I have it right. And then there's that gap where there's no one there and you come in to fill that void. But there's what Scott and people who are there, Alan Cross, Scott Turner, they all talk about the mistake of 88. This is the way they call it, where they go kind of a top 40. And I guess so when you show up at CFNY, it's like, can you explain? Like, it's a hybrid. It's like you're playing some like what I would classical, like some Cure and Depeche Mode and New Order kind of alt stuff, but you're absolutely playing songs from the top 40, like, I don't know, Phil Collins and Madonna. And what is that what's going on when you arrive?
Yeah, pretty much. And I would say that that Doug Pringle had a really big say in where that was going, and that's why he wanted someone to execute it, right? Because Doug, he was a show guy, and if you say, you would be so inaccurate if you said, "Oh, Doug Pringle didn't know what was going on." Yeah, that guy knows. That guy's brilliant, right? And he knew that he knew there was going to be a problem with this, right, in terms of the core, right? But he also said, you know what, if we can do this, Toronto is a big market, big revenue. Doesn't take much to increase your sales and your popularity and make the station more successful. So yeah, when I got there, I thought the station sounded good, to be honest. I mean, I didn't have anything to compare to, right? But
Right.
there were tunes, everything from circular impressions, and I'm just like, oh, these are kind of cool songs. I've never really like it was playing songs that were cool. I didn't really go, what the hell is this? This is just garbage. But yeah, but it was also trying to, and I do buy it to this day that that there were advocates of exposing new music, because CFTR and Chum, I guess, would have been the only two station. Q107 would have played new rock,
Yeah, they were
but
playing
nobody else was.
Roses, yeah, and stuff like that. Sure.
Yeah, so there was no other station in town that was playing new music per
Right.
se. CFTR would be, but it would only be top 40, and Chum AM same. So I did think that was an interesting concept. And the regulations, forced you to play non-hit music. So if you're going to play non-hit music, then why not expose an audience to, some of this alternative, if you will. There wasn't even really there wasn't an alternative chart back then, really, per se. So and then play it with popular music that kind of fit. And this is where we get into some subjectivity for sure.
Sure.
And when you're playing Van Halen on CFNY, and the cult would have fit. But some of these staple AOR bands and staple top 40 bands, if you will. Yeah, I mean, literally, that was if you want to talk about dropping a turd in the bathtub, right? Like that's and when you think about it, that's exactly what happened, right? The bath was nice and warm and comfortable. Somebody came in and just, here, take this. And a little went a long way negative, right? So you could tell that was, and to this day, I would tell you a format like that probably it could have been the core of what Jack became. You know what I mean? Like it's classic hits that goes from Poco to Van Halen to Madonna to just playing people's record collections, right? So I think that was the plan, and I got there to execute it because they knew I was good technical program director, right? Like I would make sure that stations in compliance really needed to be in compliance because of the pending sale. And yeah, and it was, that was a messy license. My God, that's still to this day the messiest license I've ever
These
encountered.
details, as you might know, this particular podcast is hyper focused on CFNY, and now we've got you to CFNY. So I do have questions, obviously, and you will have to tell the story of how Humble and Fred is born. But what do you mean messy compliance? Like, explain what you mean there.
Well, it is licensed to be a college station. I always hear Humble, and Fred and anybody else talk about how it was only about music, and the more obscure the better. And it was kind of licensed for that. Like it had a what's called a distinct selections clause. And I guess maybe people should know just quite quickly that every FM station in Canada was heavily content regulated. So the content regulations were different categories of audio. So there was spoken word, and then there was surveillance, there was news. Surveillance is, weather, time. News is news, not surveillance, it's news. And then there was enriched spoken word, which was not surveillance, not news. Enriched spoken word was something you'd be great at just by listening to you, because it would just mean, tell us a little bit about this band, Mike, and tell us a little bit about their history. But while you're doing that, don't tell us the time and don't tell us the temperature right now, because you're going to blow it. You'll blow this mosaic segment. So it was literally second by second that every FM station was regulated. And then you got to music. So what kind of music can you play? Well, category 1 was rock and soft rock. That means 70% of the music you play has to be soft rock. The other 30 can be mixed in. You can play Led Zeppelin, and you can play Christopher Cross. It's your call. But 70% of your music needs to be soft rock, as defined by the charts.
Well, I was going to ask how like, if Stairway to Heaven, for example, is that soft rock or hard rock? What's going on there? These hybrid songs.
See, I love that. That would absolutely be considered only category 2, which is hard rock. And you want to know why? Because it's less about the substance and the breakout of the song, the deconstruction of the song, and more about what chart did it appear on.
Wow. Okay. I'm learning. This is awesome. Okay.
Yeah, it was very complex, to be brutally honest. So, and trust me, you do not want to be out of compliance. I mean, it could have spoiled that deal.
Right. And who's buying exactly? Where are we? Is it McLean Hunter? Like, who's buying this station at this point?
McLean Hunter was, yeah. Buying it from Selkirk. So, yeah, and again, I don't know if it was scuttle the deal, but it certainly would have said, we're going to wait 1 year. We're going to see if you guys can get your shit together and get it in compliance. Mm-hmm. Because the CRTC does not do anything. I know you're out of compliance, but that's okay. All you need to, we're sure you'll get it fixed. Like, they don't operate that way. They don't renew your license like that. They don't take your word for anything. Completely different mindset, right? Of government regulatory, particularly when it comes to content. So it had all of these rules. It had something called a 900 song, like a distinct song rule, which means that you have to play 900 distinct titles. So I would tell you right now, I'm just going to throw KIF in Toronto or any other CHR station. They probably play 150 distinct titles. Now they spin 1,500 or 1,600 or 1,700 records a week, but 150 of them are distinct. So that just speaks to the 70 repeats a week, right? So CFNY had to play 900 distinct. In fact, I think it was even a little bit more. And most FMs back then were 700, which was insane. It's like, oh my God, 700 distinct selections. That's crazy. And then there was something called the repeat factor. So you couldn't play a song any more than, I think it was 10. I think it was 10 times. 10 times a week. And then it was down to a point where you sharpen the pencil because the first spin wasn't a repeat, right? So you could play it once, and then you could play it 10 more times. So that rule was in place, and it was with all FMs. Right. So if you were trying to do CHR and FM back then, good luck, right? Couldn't do it. You just can't. A 12 spin on a hot AC now is a gold song, right? So it just doesn't. Never mind currents. So it had that. Then it had a whole bunch of Category 3 music, which was defined as traditional jazz, traditional blues, new age music, classical music, basically music that had no place on any rock station in the country. Right? But every rock station had a jazz show. Every rock station had a blues show. And on those blues shows, 3/4 of the music wasn't traditional. Right? Hey, Stevie Ray Vaughan. Well, that's not traditional blues. Sorry.
Right.
So, it just went on and on. And then there was something, if you're not bored yet. So out of your broadcast weeks, 126 hours in the 6 a to midnight. So half of those had to be distinct, half had to be enriched. So there was a quarter hour, and then there was an enriched quarter hour, and that's where foreground came in. So that's like shows like Live in Toronto was considered a foreground show, as long as Scott and May didn't do the weather, didn't do traffic, didn't do a sports score, because that's surveillance. You must keep all of the spoken word content enriched. It had to be enriched spoken word. So, and each station had to be 50% enriched, and most of them were about 20% had to be foreground hours. So that's why you created all these shows. And frankly, again, maybe another podcast, that's why FM was more interesting back then, because it actually was regulated to actually have content on the air, to have people to create content and to execute content, because you had to, like, otherwise you wouldn't keep your license. So because of that,
this is why Q107 would have a show like Barometer, for example.
right, 100%. And all of that, if you think back, all of that content was enrichment, because it was interviewing guests and it was talking about things that are enriching. And believe me, there were 2 or 3 different paragraphs of what defined enriched spoken word and spoken word, right? So, but yeah, you're exactly right, because each station had a commitment to a certain amount of hours of enrichment, and then foreground quarter hours, and then something called a mosaic quarter hour. So if you wanted to do a mosaic, you can go on and speak on something that's enriched, and you'll get a mosaic quarter hour. So yeah, that
might be a good time for me to interject with something that came up in the Scott Turner episode. And the reason it came up in the Scott Turner episode is because Jeff Lumby was on Humble and Fred, and they were talking about it the previous, maybe that morning or the previous morning, I can't remember, but it was very recent. And this all started on Facebook, because of course Scott does these on this day stuff, which I quite love. And this comes back to FOTM Ivor Hamilton, who, when you arrive at CFNY, he's gone. He's now on the other side of the business, pushing bands and music and stuff. And the question comes up about the Pixies in 1989. So we had fun with this with Scott Turner, and Scott, I thought, did a pretty good job explaining your positioning. But now that you're actually here, let's resolve this once and for all. Why didn't CFNY play the Pixies back in 1989?
I wish I had a great answer for this. It was like, I don't know. I'm sure it was. I'm sure they didn't appear on the AOR chart, and I'm sure they didn't appear on the CHR chart. And it was like, I don't know, is it a fit or is it not a fit with what's going on? And no harm, no foul, right? Like, it's just, it really wasn't. There, decisions like that were not more in depth, like, really. And I believe it, but I don't recall it. You know what I mean? It was just like, oh, we didn't play the Pixies? Okay. You know what? Do you remember a guy named Bobby Gale?
No.
So he was a Shome guy. He was you would have really liked him. You'd have loved Bobby Gale. And Ivor knows him, and he's really, really well known in the community. He was tragically killed, a few years back, coming back from a concert in Montreal. So he was an independent record guy, and he just promoted everything. And he'd pick up the phone. You would, if he knew that you were a guy that wanted to talk music, you would have to find those, 2 or 3 hours a week somewhere else, right? Because he would call you and talk about everything. He'd talk about the Pixies for an hour with you, right? He's just that kind of guy. So, but just to show you what it was like, I remember he was working for Polygram as well. I don't know. I think he had a different region. Maybe he was the national guy, and Ivor was the local guy then. I'm not sure, but I remember my first meeting with him at CFNY. He walks in the office. I go, because he was servicing City as well, right? And he said, "Oh, Danny, welcome to Toronto. Welcome to CFNY. You're at a big station. It's very, yeah, it's just a big responsibility. You've got a lot. You've got big shoes to fill there." I said, "Yeah, yes, yeah. Sounds good, Bobby. So listen, I got to ask you, why did you play the Hothouse Flowers on City?" I said, "Pardon?" Yeah. He goes, "Why did you play the Hothouse Flowers on City?" I'm just like, "Bobby, like you're like 2 minutes. 2 minutes we're saying hello, and you're grilling me in the Hothouse Flowers on City." I'm just like, WTF, man? Like, what are you talking about? Anyhow, that was really, Ivor, and not as a negative, but cut from the same cloth, right? So literally,
if you go back to the, because Ivor comes from the Spirit of Radio days on CFY.
Yeah,
it was really, it was obviously not enough ears, but the reason there were so many loyal ears was how eclectic and the music, and there was the people on the air really seemed to give a shit about the music. And this is actually a great segue, because we got to talk about what's the morning show on CFNY when you arrive in April, and then we have to get the details on the Humble and Fred creation, if you will. But those are a couple of guys where, I get the sense, knowing Humble as well as I do, and the man was at my wedding, is that I don't think he gives a shit what they're playing on the air. Like, he's all about what they say into the mics, and I don't think he cares about the music. He just doesn't. And Fred grew to like the music on CFY in the 90s particularly, but I don't think he cares what they play. He just wants the most people listening so that they can, Cliff Cohen. Oh, by the way, Cliff Cohen says hello.
So, cool.
That's for you.
Yeah.
So Cliff is listening right now.
Great guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy. But so he can sell spots for the most amount of money, so people like Humble and Fred can make the most amount of their paycheck. So let's if you don't mind, who's the morning show? What is the morning show on CFY when you arrive in April 1989? And then give us some insight into when you had the idea that you can go to Montreal and get that morning show. And then while you're doing this, you have to solve a riddle that has been plaguing Toronto Mike for 12 years, which is that Humble Howard believes that you were there to get Humble Howard and Jeff Lumby to be the morning show on CFNY, but Jeff Lumby thinks that you were just there to get Humble Howard. So now the mic is yours again, Danny. Let's get the detail on morning show, CFNY 1989.
Well, those are interesting questions, and I'm like, my eyebrows are raising, right? Because I'll be happy to give you the answer to that one. So when I get there, Steve Anthony was doing the morning show, but he wasn't. You know what I mean? So he was the morning guy, and it didn't. I really don't. I don't know much. 6 months before I got there, but and again, I think that's the beauty. I think that's why they wanted me, right? It's just, this guy will come in and he'll just have blinders on and not be an asshole, but just here's what we want to get done, and he's a radio guy and he'll do it, and it won't be his way or the highway. And it wasn't like that. I really truly believe that. But it's never been about that with me. It's always about collaboration. But I think he was the morning guy, and I know for sure it didn't go over well. Like, I know Steve Anthony doing mornings didn't go over well. So I don't know if Pete and Geets were.
No, they're long gone by then. I think they.
Yeah, but however, Geets was the engineer when I got there. So
right.
Yeah, so he was still there. So great guy too, right? Just
great guy.
So the morning show wasn't. You know what? I'm going to officially and sincerely go blank on it. It wasn't anyone that was, you now have the morning show. So someone was filling in.
Okay.
So it might have been James. What was James?
James Baby Scott.
James Scott. There you go. Yeah. It might have been him. It might have been just someone was there doing the morning show. So, and you know what? Maybe even Alan did some morning show shifts there ahead of time. But
Steve Anthony doesn't work out, so now there's like an interim morning show when you get there.
correct.
So you're part of your mandate, I suppose, is to get a permanent morning show.
100%. So that's the first thing they say. Okay, we have to get a morning show. And I said, I think I have one. I think I know who we could get. So, and I thought of Howard and Jeff, who were doing mornings at CJFM. I said, first of all, I was like, okay, well, first, I've known these guys forever. Like I won't be hiring somebody who I don't know and they don't know me. And I mean, everything that we say to each other will all be true, and there won't be any. But I thought you said the last, it would be great. So yeah, that was me, to be honest. And I just said, okay, Howard and Jeff, that's what they were. Or it might have been Humble and Jeff. I don't know, maybe on CJFM it wasn't.
I feel like he wasn't Humble in Montreal, but
yeah, I think you're right. So they're doing the show, and it's good. It's going great. Their ratings are great, and and most FM stations back then, because of the lack of competition, if you were a decent station, you did well, right? Like there's no. So it was a good business to be in, good business to be doing mornings in Montreal. Which is great. Like they loved it, having a great time. However, Howard had bigger fish to fry. So Howard was like, nope, Toronto is good enough for me. So Jim Fonger and I drove to Montreal, and we met with them, had lunch, might have been dinner, I guess. I remember stayed over downtown, had a great time, and then had breakfast with them, kept yakking and yakking. And that was really more for Jim to meet them, because he didn't really know them, but I knew them. And so next thing you know, it's just rah, 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 we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. Everything's great. So we're driving back feeling pretty confident. And then I don't know, chronology, a day later, 2 days later, a week later, whatever, Lumbee calls and said, no, I'm out. I don't want to do it. I said, oh, okay, why? What's up? He goes, well, I don't want to move to Toronto. I don't know about the station. It just doesn't really, because Lumbee actually does care about the station. So he's like, yeah, I don't know. I have to have faith in it. And it just doesn't seem like it's going to be right for me. I said, oh, well, that's too bad. And hung up the phone, and then, hello, Daddy, Howard, what's up? I go, well, yeah, just talk to Lumbee. That's too bad. Yeah, well, listen, just because he doesn't want to come doesn't mean I don't. I want this job. I said, oh, well, you're it's not a wrench in the gears or anything, but okay, interesting. So we talked about that, and then said, well, we need a partner. And then, there's somebody here named Fred Patterson, who's a pretty crazy, and Fred and Darren were like, those guys to me were an oasis there, right? For me going in. There were a lot of people. I mean, I never felt, unliked, unwanted, disrespected. I never felt that in the hallways. Like I thought the people were all great. I loved all the talent. Like I thought, May Potts, like, oh my God, this woman's incredible. I really felt that way about Scott. I said, this guy's super talented. Liked all the talent, even Alan Cross. I mean, I don't think Alan liked me, but I don't think it was because of anything I did to him. I don't think he liked what I symbolized, in that time. But anyhow, Fred and Darren were just, oh my God, we can hardly wait. This is so exciting. We have a PD, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do this. And we said, hey, so Fred, listen, what a partnership. This guy named Humble Howard, and he's in Montreal. Wow, okay, thanks. Fred was doing the sports, and he was doing his commentary. And so he and I fly to Montreal. We flew instead of drove, and we had lunch with Howard, and those two just hit it off like boom, 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 boom. So next thing you know, we hire them to do the morning show, and then Lumbee was, well, he didn't want the job, and he didn't want the job after. He didn't come back and say, well, I didn't know you were going to hire Howard. And so, well, don't put me in the middle of this. I got a station to run. I got a family to feed, So do you. You're fine. You're a single guy living in Montreal. Do your thing. You're successful. You'll be great there. And you guys are breaking up. Sorry. And so they did. And Lumby stayed at Montreal, was very successful. And then I ended up hiring him in Hamilton, which is after the at Y95. So, and then, so Humble and Fred were born, and it was just amazing. Like I was already friends with Howard, and he was, he was super engaged. And then one of the first things we did was we buried him alive at the shopping mall. What's the mall on 427 and QE? Big mall there.
There's Dixie Value Mall, and then there's Cloverdale Mall, and there's Sherway Gardens.
I think it was Sherway.
Sherway,
so we put this big, we put this big thing together. Humble Howard's in town. He's the morning guy at CFNY and FM 102, and we're going to bury him alive for 48 hours. And Darren's like, he just loving it, right? He's just, oh my God, we're doing promotions. This is incredible, right?
Right.
So it was great, and everything was kind of the rest is history, if you will. So
now it is interesting though, because you don't stick around very long at CFNY. You're gone in February 1990. And speaking of not sticking around very long, Humble Howard himself flies the coop. I suppose your successor, Reiner Schwartz. I've heard them talk about Reiner, the late great Reiner Schwartz, who is a talent, of course, but I'm not sure Howard felt comfortable with Reiner at the helm, and left for CKFM, and he's the first guy to say Mix 99.9 over the year. But then it's just interesting to look at when you leave, Howard doesn't stick around very long, although of course he does come back, and then the rest is history, if you will. But,
yeah, exactly. And look, I don't think him leaving wasn't a protest move for me. I mean, as I said, it's like I cannot believe, Mike, that all these years later, I'm sitting here talking into an iPhone about CFNY. Like you're like, wow, it was a short period of time in my 46-year career, but very impactful. I mean, incredibly impactful. And I have good feelings about that. I mean, I really, maybe I'm one of those guys where, I've been through some shit in the biz, but I forget most of it. It's kind of like childbirth, right? Where I hear it's the worst possible thing that could ever happen to a woman. Right. And, but 2 days later, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. Right. You forget all about the pain. So, and Reiner, what can I tell you?
Well, Humble and Fred will tell you he was batshit crazy. Now, that's a quote from those two gentlemen. I never had the pleasure of meeting Reiner Schwartz, although I know a lot of people were big fans of his work. And shout out to Danny Elwell, who sings his praises every opportunity. But they would talk about meetings where Reiner Schwartz would say, we're going to be the station that doesn't say the call letters. And then there'll be questions like, well, how will they know for those diaries? Because this is back in the day with the diaries. You got to write in what you how will they know what station they're listening to? Oh, they'll just know that this is the station that doesn't say the call letters. So stuff like that scared Howard away.
Oh my God. Yeah. And Darren too. I mean, Darren was just,
so Darren,
he and I would go.
Darren's last name. I feel like we're dropping this name Darren, but people are like, who are we talking
about? Oh, sorry. Darren Waslek.
Right, Darren Waslek. And he was a promotions guy. Like, he's the guy who was doing, before FOTM, Captain Phil Evans, I suppose. Yeah. He was doing promotions. Okay.
Yeah, and Phil was amazing too. Yeah, Darren, brilliant. I mean, the guy's just unbelievable. He again became a very good friend, and anything that station ever did, he was at the helm of it. And anything we did at Y95, he was at the helm of it. And anything we did at Q107, he was at the helm of it. Like he's the guy that took medium into special all the time. He was just he was always that kind of guy. So
quick, here's what we're gonna do. I do want to tell you all the gifts you're not receiving because you're not here in the basement right now, and that's because you're far away.
Just a minute. Is there no courier service? Is there?
I don't know if I can. I might hold out. I know you have to come to Toronto once in a blue moon, and then when I finally meet you, I'll give you some gifts here. But just
okay. So let's get the mentions in.
Well, firstly, I have to shout out FOTM Hall of Famer Peter Gross, who has the greatest horse racing podcast in the world. It's called Down the Stretch. Okay. Peter's going to be here tomorrow, so I can help him he's going to be in court via Zoom, and he's going to do it in this basement. And it's a long story, but it's all in Toronto Mike's archives if you want to go back and hear his most recent appearance about how he can't get insurance for his car because he was delivering food. Anyways, there's a whole story of how he got kind of screwed over.
Funny.
Yeah, it's a wild story. But is it true, Mr. Kingsbury, that you are responsible for the greatest day in radio history, the day that Peter Gross did a DJ shift on CFNY?
Well, he did more than that. I was going to say, he was at CFNY, right? Like, no, we brought him in. I brought him in to do sports, and he was doing sports in the morning, like during this interim period, I think. And yeah, he came in to do sports. And again, I didn't know this guy from Adam, right? I'm just like, wow, this guy's great. Like, who are you? You're bizarre. I love you.
He's the best.
And so does he say that he also got to do a shift?
Well, he talks about receiving his severance check because Billy Van, he says, delivered his severance check. According to Billy Van from hilarious House of Frightenstein, and kind of a famous kind of a actor.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I was. You don't mean from hilarious House of Frightenstein?
Yeah, the one and only, the late great Billy Van. Yeah,
I don't remember that person in HR. But no, like,
he might have been working for a courier service or something that delivered it.
Okay. So this had nothing to do with CFM.
So what was Peter Gross? And again, he's literally going to be in this basement tomorrow, so I can kind of flesh this out with him tomorrow. But how long? But did you hire him to be on the air?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I guess it didn't work out so well because he's getting a severance check later that year or whatever. But maybe there's no room for him with Humble and Fred. I don't know what happened there, but
yeah, you know what? I don't know either, and I know nothing. Nothing weird happened there. It just got weird. You know what I mean? Like when Reiner came in, it was very, God rest his soul. And I ended up hiring Reiner at 640 later because giving him a job that I think he could do, which was like, oh, look, how's it feel doing something that you're qualified for? This is great, right? So, but yeah, no, he was weird. It was a head shake. It was like, but you know what? I always try to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So.
I hear you. Okay, so one more quick, because a name that comes up often on the show, mainly because I can't find him to get him on Toronto Mike, and I'm not the only one looking for him, because of course there's a CFY documentary, which is going to be like, people can see this in the fall. I believe it might even debut at TIFF or something, but it's in the can. It's done. I guess they're just licensing music and polishing it or whatever. But none of us can find Chris Shepard, but is it true? So when you arrive, is Chris Shepard the music director? What's the role of Chris Shepard when you get there?
No, he's the musical consultant.
Okay, musical consultant.
Yeah, he was consultant, and I mean, I just another guy. I just friggin' love that guy, right? He was same thing. He was very, very kind to me, very professional, Danny, it's great. Jeez, what do you think? Do you regret coming here? A bunch of weirdos. Hey, a bunch of effing weirdos around here. Yeah, I loved him, and I went for lunch with him downstairs at the Caribbean restaurant so many times. And I remember the first thing Shep said to me. Well, one of the first things he goes, yeah. So when I was mixing the Ian Astbury record in Hamilton, and. Yeah, I mean, the Cult? He goes, yeah, I mixed that. I mixed She Sells Sanctuary. I go, you did? I said, you're bullshitting me. Like a guy from Winnipeg coming, no, I work with those guys all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, cool. But this guy's the coolest guy. And I remember he, by the way, I don't think I can get him. Like
you don't know where he is what you're telling me.
I do not. But I do recall him doing his shows at RPM on Friday nights at Club 102, and he made money doing that.
Well, I mean, so the way it worked, of course, is David Marsden begat Chris Shepard, who begat Martin Streak.
Yeah, Martin was there when I was there, of course, but he was working for Darren, and he was really, I mean, not disrespectfully, he was kind of like the roadie for the roadshow. So he was in charge of the CFNY the FM 102 roadshow. So he had the big truck and with the logo on it, and we had all the sound systems and all that stuff. That was his baby. So now I know he moved into because he DJ'd some of that stuff and then became bigger. I don't have the same relationship, or did not have the same relationship with Martin. It wasn't bad. It was just
Right. He was that was the famous story that Marsden tells on this show about how he was so excited he got his license and he could drive that truck, and that was his his gateway was like driving the truck for the road show. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, exactly. Yeah, I was interviewed for that movie or documentary coming up. So it was interesting, and that was now I guess maybe well over a year ago. I did go downtown Ottawa, and it was really weird. Two strangers, not they were not unfriendly. In fact, they were the exact opposite. Very, very, very nice people. And I said, so I don't know how much I can tell you. You know, it's like, and are you sure? Are you sure? You know, oh yeah, no, for sure. You were there, like, and I said, okay, so told a few stories about NY, talked about as many people as possible, and so it'll be interesting to see where that all turns out.
And all the questions were about the Pixies, right? Of course.
I admit the Pixies did not come up.
It was all. When for sure, I can't wait to see the doc. Scott says I'm going to get to see it at a premiere or something, but in here in Toronto. But you're kind of an important part, even if it's for no other reason than we need to get to the Humble and Fred part. But that's where you'll come in, because you can tell the story that you just kind of shared with me about bringing in Humble and Fred and everything that was going on. But here, let me do this right now, because I realize you never know how much time to carve out for a conversation, but we're just wrapping up your CFNY term right now. We've been talking for 90 minutes, which is unbelievable. Wow. I know. So you're going to burn through the rest of your career in a half an hour, but I am going to tell you what I will give you whenever I get to meet you in the flesh. I have a lasagna for you from Palma Pasta. If you like Italian food, you can't do any better than Palma Pasta. They're in Mississauga and Oakville. I don't think you can get them there in Renfrew there, but you can get, you are in Ontario, so you can get Great Lakes beer at El Studio's, and Great Lakes Brewery has some fresh craft beer for you. Much love to them. This is cool, I have a wireless speaker from Moneris, and with that wireless speaker, you can listen to Yes, We Are Open, which is an award-winning podcast from Moneris, hosted by Al Grego. Speaking of the western part of Canada, Al Grego went to Calgary, and he went to Heritage Park Historical Village. It's one of Calgary's premier tourist attractions. It opened in 1964 with a mission to connect visitors with the history of Western Canada. So it's all coming full circle here. But he chatted with a spokesperson there and about the park's origin, how it evolved over the last 60 years. There's some great stories, and they talk about the fun attractions and the history. And that history of Heritage Park is the most recent episode of Yes, We Are Open, so you can subscribe to that. And the Advantaged Investor from Raymond James Canada, where you can get some best practices, some tips on how to manage your financial portfolio. Even if you've got a guy, you'll learn a great deal. It'll help you out. So the Advantaged Investor podcast from Raymond James Canada. I wish you were here, because I would invite you to Christie Pitts for the Toronto Maple Leafs home opener. That is the baseball team. And I had a history book I'll save for you on the history of the team. It's such an amazing history. People should listen to Adam Bunch on Toronto Mike last week talking about the history of Toronto Maple Leafs baseball. But I'll be there May 12th. So listeners, come to Christie Pitts. It's free. Come by, say hi. I'm recording live at 2 p.m. on May 12th. And last but not least, recyclemyelectronics.ca. That's where you go if you have any old electronics, old cables, and you need to know where to drop them off to be properly recycled so the chemicals don't end up in our landfill. Danny, I'll take care of you when I finally meet you. All right, let's burn this part. I obviously very interested in the CFNY history, but you mentioned what's next? Is it Y95? Like, what's after CFNY?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me read a note. Tyler Campbell, also known as the VP of Sales over here, who should sell something, because he's no Cliff Cohen, if you know what I mean. But Tyler,
right.
But who is? Okay. I've been trying unsuccessfully to find the rejection letter I got from Danny Kingsbury when he was program director at Y95 in Hamilton. I applied to every TV and radio station in Southern Ontario after my first year of university. I got a nice stack of rejection letters on official stationery, and I wish I could find them. There's probably some interesting names on them. So that's our gateway to discuss Y95. Do you bring Lumbee to Y95?
Yes, I did.
This story, it all
Absolutely.
connects, right? All the pieces connect. Okay, so we're not going to spend much time at Y95, but give us a little bit about Y95, and then I have a few questions about Q107 and 640.
Okay, so I ended up leaving CFNY, and then Don Schaefer called me and said, "I've got a buddy out in Hamilton, Don Lucy, who's looking for somebody out there." And I said, we were living in Brampton at the time, and I said, "Oh, geez, I don't know if I'm, I became a Toronto guy. I don't know if I'm ready for Hamilton, after Toronto." Like, half kidding, but so I said, "Yeah, no, I'd be happy to." So I went and I met a guy named Don Lucy, who's just, I don't know, he's on a pedestal for me. But so we hit it off. He hires me at CKDS FM 95.3, and it was soft AC. And so we gave that a bit of a go. Shafe thought that station could be pumped up a little bit, So this is the opposite, right? This is a soft AC. Can we turn it a little? I'll turn the volume up a little bit. Not turn it into a rock station, but so we did that, and then all of a sudden the regs changed. Not all of a sudden, but the regs changed, and all of that category 1, category 2, category 3, category 4 was. So any FM station in the country could do whatever format they wanted. So bing, Darren was the promo guy there. He left CFNY to come out to Hamilton, and Lumbee was the morning person. And then a couple of other, really, really good talents. Jeremy Smith was there. And so we had a pretty good AC station going, but then we're like, and that signal's incredible. So I remember walking into Don's office. Okay, what if we became Steel 95? What's that? I go, Steel 95 would be a rock station. Great. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And all of a sudden I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's too blue collar. So, well, let's keep it simple. Let's just go rock and call ourselves Y95. Who cares? And we're owned by Westcom, so there's Q107, and then there'll be a Y95. Right. He's like, sounds good. So he tells Shafe and everybody else that we're going to go rock, and they're just like, "Oh my God, are you insane? You can't do that. You can't." So we did. So literally, changed the station to classic rock, and I'd say, I don't know, everybody says this, but we were certainly right up there for one of the first true classic rock stations. Now in 1991, when it happened, because we did a year of AC, 1991 when it happened. Remember, there was nothing newer than 91, right? So right. Classic rock was 91 and older. Right? See, I think about those days too. I go, oh yeah, we didn't play any 90s because it started in 91. Right. But anyhow, so we signed the station on in Hamilton, big signal. I mean, one of the best signals in the Golden Horseshoe, and deep pockets from Wick and Mike. Remember I said about one of my happiest days going to Ched? Well, the happiest days ever were Y95. I mean, that thing just, it just exploded. Now, was it brilliant? So found the tiniest little hole and exposed it. No, we're in Hamilton. There's no rock station. And we got a big signal. And, 50% of the tuning in Toronto and in Hamilton comes from Toronto and hits FM in St. Catharines. Like, let's repatriate some hours. And right now, I think that's a BS when I hear that story. But yeah, let's repatriate some hours back to Hamilton. We'll make some money. So yeah, that thing took off. And within a year later, we had 427,000 Q, which was the third largest rock station west of, it was bigger than Vancouver. So, wow. So it was Q107, Shome, and Y95. Wow. It was just a frigging rocket ship. Everybody who worked there loved it. What was really great about my time there was that it was so different from CFNY, and not because I hated CFNY. I did not. It was just so, everybody was on site. Engineers were on, Darren builds his door down in the lobby of the station, and we sell merchandise out of there. He drives to Woodstock and gets Woodstock rocks and puts logos on them. Like, we did promotions. Music was great. Signal was fantastic. everything was great. So I mean, it just was a rocket ship. There's no question.
Hey,
So
does Mike Richards show up?
yes, he does. Yeah, with Mr. Lumbe. So,
Okay,
and that guy's a kook too.
good friend
Again, love him.
good friend of the show. Good FOT.
Yeah,
Mike Richards.
yeah. I mean, love the guy. He's those two. Nobody to this day could make me, can give me tears of laughter when those two are together. And they start doing their voices. They're anywhere from Danny Gallivan to, I mean, just so
Bob
funny
Cole.
together, right?
The late
Yeah,
great
oh
Bob
yeah,
Cole.
absolutely. And the Young and the Restless.
Victor
I mean,
Newman.
plus he was just a funny guy to begin with. So yeah, they were together there, and so how I got to Q was
Okay. So you're already in the Wick family. There is it. Just we need you back in the big smoke. You're good at this.
It was one of those things went awry in Toronto a little bit. Like I still don't really know what happened there, but Don Schaefer was the president and general manager, and a couple of other people. Christopher Grossman was the sales manager, and so they had left the station, and so Don Lucy, and this I think is really one of the first ever that happens all the time now. He said to Ted Smith, who was the president, well, why don't I can run both markets. He said, but I would want Danny in Toronto for Q and 640. And the same thing, it was the time when Q was like, so, Jake was going to Winnipeg and Derringer was going to Shome. And so who gets to go in there again? And like, oh my God, I've got to take a Heritage station and change it. So it was fine. It was not a complaint, just the way it was. So I ended up starting at Q there, and I was doing Y95 and Q for let me tell you, maybe 6 months. And the reason I went just back to Toronto full time was because 680 signed off the air to go news, right. And they went a bit early. And I know this because I worked at Rogers. They went early because they were sure that 640 was going to go news. And I remember saying Sandy Sanderson and Tony Viner said, well, no, we weren't, but I'm glad that you did it. And we were really happy to when 680 signed off, because that left 640, which was floundering, right? It was AM 640, the beat of Toronto, a second top 40 in the marketplace. It wasn't really doing anything. So they fired Jesse and Gene, they fired Tarzan Dan. And so that day, Don said, oh, okay, you have to do 640. That was nicer than that. But, would you do both those Toronto stations? And then we hired somebody else for Y95. I said, okay. So I didn't live to regret that, but life would have been a lot easier just staying in Hamilton. But anyhow, it was all good. So we lived in Burlington at the time, so it was easy to commute. So it was take over Q, take over 640, and Q was, as I said, imagine like Jake's moving to Winnipeg. And that was really, Wick was weird that way, where all of a sudden, well, first of all, we signed on as a classic rock station in Hamilton when Toronto was there, but we didn't think of it that way. It's like, no, we're not your competition. You're in Toronto, we're in Hamilton. It's all good. And then Jake moves to Winnipeg, and then Derringer wanted the morning show, and I remember interviewing him for it, and we're literally like, yeah, okay, man, you're the guy. Like, what's take your yellow pad and write down what you want, and which he did. And there's always funny stories of that. I won't get into too much, but there's a couple of little funny things, like with all the big demands and the cell phone and a cell phone. Like, right. With all this money, you can get your own cell phone. But anyhow, so we're literally like, yeah, listen, of course you'd be the guy. But next thing you know, nope, I'm going to Montreal. I'm gonna do talk radio in Montreal. Okay, so no morning show, no drive show. And
doesn't he go to the Fan first, or am I getting it? Like, doesn't he go?
No,
the Fan and then Montreal, or
no? I think he went to Montreal.
Okay. I'm just wondering where because he was the morning show on the Fan 590, and
he came back, and it was
okay.
Talk show. You like that was that move to do talk radio was the reason he became so successful, in my opinion, because he learned how to talk on the radio and not just say, here's Led Zeppelin and here's another dick joke. It's just he learned how to communicate. Well, he honed his craft. I mean, he knew how to do it. He always had the brains for it, of course, but he really honed his craft doing talk radio, and then obviously it evolved into why he became so successful. So,
oh yeah, nobody argues that against John Derringer being a great broadcaster. It's other aspects that people will contest.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate how everything kind of turned out there, but yeah. So I was there, and then next thing you know, we've got 6:40 a.m. and hired Jesse and Gene.
Yeah.
And money was no object, like in those days. It's not like they got, it wasn't like $1 million deal, but they got paid well, and they got a big bonus, right? As okay, if you get us big ratings, we'll give you a big bonus. And I remember taking them for lunch and giving them the bonus at lunch. I said, this is cool. This is fun. So congrats. Thanks, guys. Everything's fantastic. And Tarzan was great in the afternoon, and he did well. And yeah, and that station again went from a 1 share to a 5 share. And then, as it turns out, Scruff came in to do the morning show at Q, and Joey Vendetta did Drive at Q.
Right.
And in the first, again, year and a half, like really successful. Like everything kind of skyrocketed again. And then we had 640, so it was really big times. And then we wanted to kind of keep things going. So we got 640 into talk because
Top 40.
Yeah, that's right. So we did that, and Bill Carroll was doing, Jane Houghton was on stage, Shelley Klink, Sue Johansson, so like we had lots of really good talent. That's the station we brought. Oh, and by the way, Marsha Lederman, who's now like a Globe and Mail feature columnist, and they did a show in the afternoon, so it was good. I mean,
Gene Valitis had that reunion with Jane Houghton.
That's right. So yeah, so and again, it was good. But again, you're going up against CFRB and you're going up against CBC.
No, my understanding is no ratings, right? I mean, you've had great successes, but when Wick tells you you're doing this talk 640, you're only human. Like, not a success is what I understand.
I think that's right. And to be fair, I think because Wick had successful CKNW in Vancouver, they said, well, we should have one of those in Toronto. So let's make that happen. Well, you forget that CKNW has been doing the same format for 75 years. It's the CFRB, right? So yeah, I think it's easy to be in any other market and armchair and say, oh, well, CFRB doesn't sound that good and blah, blah. Yeah, what is CFRB? I don't know. We're beating those guys. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, the station ended up with a 1 share, and because it's news talk, frankly, it's a little more attractive to advertisers. So I don't know if we kept the lights on, as they say, with it, but in those days not that didn't matter, but there was so much money in Toronto that it's not like if you were, breaking even or losing a bit, that it was that big of a deal given the circumstances. So and then we decided to get the Leafs on Q, which was again, what a super fun project that was.
Can I ask you about that? So I mentioned that Chorus Key yesterday with Rob Johnston, and they have a room in there, as you might know. There's a room in there which is called the Home of the Leafs Meeting Room. That's the name of this thing. I took a couple of photos. You can see them on TorontoMike.com if you want to see them right now.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's called Home of the Leafs Meeting Room.
Yeah, so it was funny because we ended up getting the Leafs, and Don had a contact at Molson, and then Molson was like, "You would be interested in the Leafs?" Because their radio deal was up. He said, yeah, we'd be interested. And they're like, why? So, well, it's rock and roll, beer, hockey, it's the Leafs. And this was me, the Oiler guy, right? I'm like, hey, if there's any team that will be successful no matter what they do, it's the Leafs. Right. So we ended up negotiating a deal there, and I'm, like my name's on that contract, which is kind of cool, the first contract.
Wow.
So,
but that's a bold move to move it to FM, right? Because, typically it's an AM property, the Maple Leafs.
There was one other station in Pittsburgh was doing the Penguins on FM. right? That we knew of. So yeah, so we knew, yeah, it was a risk for sure because, you know, it's a first in Canada and, you know, heritage station and all of that. But, you know, the truth is there were ulterior motives, if I'm being honest. So we did get it. And then Jake comes back to do mornings. Scruff goes to Winnipeg. Jake comes back. And so Darren, all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna give away a house. It's gonna be the house that Hugh Hockey built. And we're gonna blah, 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 blah. So we give away another house out in Clarington, and big promotion. Joe Bowen's doing hockey. And I mean, life's, you know, Bruce Haney's got Rock Radio Network going. I mean, life's just great. We're boogieing along, and then by the spring, the ratings weren't that great on it. Like they hurt the ratings on Q. So we're like, okay, well, you know what? We kind of wanted them for 640 anyhow. So so we ended up moving them over there, and they're still there, right? Like after all this time. So, but that was fun. There was a lot of.
They're not there anymore, right? They're shared by MLS is owned by Rogers and Bell, so it's like $5.90 and $10.50 take turns, basically.
Yes.
But Holy Mackinac, Joe Bowen's still there. Great Lakes has a Holy Mackinac lager they're selling right now. So
Joe Bowen, I still have his business card that he gave me when I had lunch with him about coming over, and he was like, "I'd sure love to come over. Would sure love to have you, Joe. That'd be amazing." So, yeah, great guy. So yeah, so that was all good, and then I guess it was about 96. So I was there maybe 5 years.
Were you there for the Howard Stern experiment there on?
No, that happened after I left.
Okay, but did you have to clear the track for it? Like, are you part of the did you know that was the plan?
No.
Yeah,
no, I think that was Pat Cardinal's plan, and so Jesse and Gene were doing mornings at Q when I left, and they did not get along with my replacement at all. So, and there's lots
shocked by this.
Yeah. So anyhow, so they ended up out, and then Pat had the idea to bring Stern in, which again was pretty outrageous, but I mean it obviously worked. And then obviously Derringer went in after Stern. So I had gone to Kiss Country.
Okay, so before Kiss, that's where you're back with Sharon Taylor.
That's right.
Okay, so quick question.
She was the GM. Yeah, and she called me up one day and said, "Do you want to get out of all the chaos?" I said, "Well, it's kind of chaos, but you know, this company Ralco, they're pretty amazing. They're not WIC. They're not publicly traded. It's private." And I knew the Rawlinsons certainly by reputation. And guess who also worked for that company? Doug Pringle. So he was, you know, he liked me for sure, particularly liked about, you know, the CFNY experiment, and thought I did well there. And so anyhow, I ended up taking that job, and yeah, I'm looking, it was great. I have no regret, you know. I have no regrets. I'm sure that if I'd have stayed at Q, my decision probably would have been made for me at some point. But again, no regrets, and I learned a lot. And working for Ralco was pretty cool. I mean, I know people call that company a bit bizarre, but when you work for the guy who signs your check, it's pretty great. It's pretty great.
All right, so a little mop up on the WIC before, because I want to shout out, of course, my friend and client Larry Fedoric, who I believe could be heard on the air at KISS as well.
He was there. He was there when I got there. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cliff, Jackie, and Larry F.
Right. They did the ads with Shania Twain, as I recall.
That's
fun
right.
Story from Larry about that. Okay, but you can hear that on his podcast. Now, I found it interesting as a listener that you kind of had this rotation, and some of this is before your time and then some during your time, but Scruff Connors, you mentioned, Brother Jake, Jesse and Gene, they kind of like do multiple rounds of morning shows on Q. It was kind of a revolving door, but all the while my dear friend John Gallagher is just kind of hanging out there, and I think that's kind of interesting in retrospect.
Yeah, I think it is too. And again, John, like I mean, he's a real character. I had nothing but time for him. I mean, I feel with John, and I feel it today. I don't know if anybody had Toronto, by the ghoulies the way he did, right? I mean, he was in his peak. I mean, he was doing, the Q Morning Zoo in the morning show, and was doing late night sports on City. So if you want to talk about, this guy's got it covered. This guy's building his brand. He's building his reputation. Now, would that be hard? Yeah.
No,
sure.
but he did snort a lot of coke.
Yeah, I was going to say that he had it. He had it by the. He was like, oh, this guy's in control of his career, right? Like this guy's gonna.
And
So
where does he make the time to bed the 600 consenting adults? Which he has bragged about on the Gallagher and Gross Save the World podcast. I was lucky enough.
Oh yeah.
So
I don't know. I wasn't that close to him.
All right, so shout out to John Gallagher, but one more name from the Wick era that I got a question about. Gary Spaceman Bell. One of the he's no longer with us. Shout out to Ridley Home. But he's one of the weirder characters of that era, and he comes in from CFTR. He's like a top 40 DJ, and then of course he leaves in great controversy for repeating some anti-Semitic tropes on the air, some conspiracies, etc. But just what's the question exactly? While I may be in the minority for enjoying the oddball format at the time, on reflection, it didn't make much sense. How much was that a holdover of the foreground programming requirement that from the mid-90s? So essentially, maybe tell us a little bit about the role of Gary Spaceman Bell and that show, that conspiracy-type show that he was hosting. I'm trying to remember the name.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's that's a good question. I'm not lost me a little bit with the foreground because obviously AM had nothing to do with foreground.
Yeah, it might be just Neil. The question came from Neil. He might just not have known that foreground.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I didn't, because it was an overnight show. I didn't. There were a lot of guys like Gary who I worked with. Deanna Nason was one. There were Kenny the Hitman. There were a lot of these jocks that were around that were they were. I had great respect for them. Like they were really solid radio people. You know what I mean? Like they're really. I said to people that here's the difference in Toronto is that everybody, no matter whether you are saying good morning Q107 or you're doing an all night show or you're producing overnights with Andy Frost, no matter who you are, no matter what position you are, you're good at it. You're like kind of like the top of the game, right? So everybody, there were no right out of college, into a big role. It just didn't happen that way. So because of that, I was like, I got to work with a lot of people that, had some resumes and had some talent and maybe also had some bad luck, maybe had a couple of bad breaks along the way. Right. So I always tried to find a place for everybody, like kind of how can you help? Where would you fit in best? But yeah, I mean, I didn't have a ton of interaction with Spaceman, but yeah, he was quite a character. I remember having good conversations with him and literally like, hey, live it up, like do your thing, man. Like we're doing talk radio, have fun.
Right, fascinating characters. I love the characters, like the Peter Grosses and the John Gallaghers. Like these are all the characters I completely adore, actually. But okay, although I never did met Gary Bell, and again. Some of those conspiracy theories realm into places which are unacceptable, and that's
correct
for him. So I'm not trying to make light of that at all, of course. But
no.
So post Kiss, you're a Rogers guy, is that correct?
Well, but I wasn't at Kiss when Rogers bought Kiss.
Right. So that's how
on that crazy night with the restaurant night, which. I know the truth, so no
can
matter
you tell us that? Because I believe it's Mike. I want to say, is it Mike? Whose story is it? Lumby's story? No, please.
Yeah, both of them. Yeah, Lumby and Richards, both of them have the. Now they're not wrong, but they embellish, right? Like every time there's a new layer on the tree, right? Every time I hear that story, I'm like, how come there's a new ring on that tree? Like it was what it was. But.
Let's get the real. Just give us that real story, and again, then we'll get you to retirement very quickly because I just saw it hit the 2-hour mark. So what we can be assured of is that Fred Patterson will not listen to this episode because he tells me he won't listen to anything that's like over 45 minutes. So please, what happened that night?
Okay, so I knew a couple of days. So the regs changed, and stations were allowed to buy another station, right? So we kind of knew that there was going to be some things happening. We kind of thought Ralco might buy a station, but Ralco ended up selling. So they sold KISS to Rogers. And I knew the day when Andrew Forsyth came in my office and said, "Hey, can I get a backup of your music system or music master?" I go, "No." "Well, why do you want that? And who are you?" Like, I knew him, right? But he said, "Oh, it's for we're doing some research on." Oh, okay, great. Anyhow, so we knew something was coming. Sharon Taylor says to me, "Book a restaurant, a nice restaurant, on this date for a meeting." So I booked the Rosewater Supper Club, which is a nice restaurant. I know there was a private meet room upstairs, and it's for, book it for 4 o'clock on Friday. And so we did, and told everybody, be at the Rosewood. There's a staff meeting at the Rosewood Supper Club, 4 o'clock on Friday. And Brenda, who was the assistant, she made the reservation and everything was there. And so I get a call from the Rosewater at about 3. Oh, Sharon comes into my office at 3 o'clock and says, "Don't go to the Rosewood." I go, "What do you mean?" Like, "You stay here." I'm like, "Okay." "What are you talking about, Willis?" Right? So it was chaos, right? Something's going on. What's going on? So I get a call from the Rosewood, and I think it was Samantha Houston, because it was Jeff, Mike, and Sam. Samantha Houston calls, said, "Hey, there's no reservation here for Ralco at 4 o'clock." I said, "There is? There isn't?" Like, "Yeah, there is." Like, "No, there's one for Chum." I said, "There's a reservation at the Rosewater Supper Club for Chum, but not for Ralco." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well," phones back then. "I just found out that we're either buying Chum or Chum's buying us." That's a weird way to find out. "Okay, well, listen, if that's for us, so you guys just stay put and away you go." And then hell hidden, it's not like it hit the fan. It was just like, okay, here's the deal. So I stayed back. All the salespeople stayed back. Julie Adams stayed back. So anybody that was either going to stay on stayed back at the station, and everybody who was going to go, which was the morning show and whatever other people were at the restaurant. And so Gord shows up there, Gord Rollinson, and just did the old, "Hey, sorry everyone, we've sold the station. It means you're out, and it's nothing you did, and blah blah blah, and you'll all be taken care of." And the one thing that I sort of laugh at now is that Jeff and Mike were, I guess, kind of running up a tab, right? They were having some drinks and appetizers, and then Gord leaves, and then those guys ended up having to pay their tab, right? Which, in the big picture, like, yeah, you'll get reimbursed for it, okay? Like, what has this been? Like, yeah, like, that's ridiculous. It was a ridiculous time, and the company wouldn't, neither company, would Rogers or Ralco, would stiff you for your drinks, right? But I just love how it turned into we're going to stiff for the bill. Okay, well, you're going to be fine, and we'll reimburse you for it. But so that's how that happened. And the next thing you know, Kenny the Hitman was doing Drive on KISS Country, and Sharon Taylor walks in, and she's got a DAT tape. She puts it in the DAT machine, closes it. There's a bit of a sign off for KISS Country. Welcome to KISS. Welcome to KISS 92.5. No, sorry, Power 92.5.
Right.
Toronto's hit music stations on the air. I'm driving home, and it's top 40.
And you didn't have the rights to that name, Power, right? That's why it had to go.
No, that's right. It was owned by Evanoff, because they had a station in Newmarket. I think they still have it. But
and a quick question, because when you tell that story, which is riveting, you talk about how the reservation is not for Ralco or whatever, but then in your story you say Chum, but you mean Rogers, right?
No, Chum.
So can you explain that to me? What do I know? I've never worked at radio, but Rogers doesn't own. So Rogers had already bought Chum at this point. Like, how does, just help me out with the?
You know what? It was a receptionist scribble, right? Okay. So Brenda calls 3 days in advance.
Okay.
Says that and whoever made the reservation at the restaurant put down Chum.
Okay.
thinking all radio stations are the same, I guess, right?
Oh, okay. Okay, it's sort of like,
So it was just an honest mistake, right?
right, like that's just yeah, like hey, I like a Coke, but really what you want is a Sprite or whatever. But all pop.
Yeah, well, Pepsi did. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Pepsi do.
It was.
Okay, fascinating story. I've heard that story. It's kind of become legendary. I think I might have to at some point create a mockumentary on this story. But now I've had accounts from Jeff Lumby and Mike Richards and Sharon Taylor and now yourself, and it's kind of wild. And yes, Mike and Jeff love to hit home the point that they had to pay for their drinks. That was a key part of this.
Yeah, and yeah, was that right? No, that was not cool. But don't run up the tab either.
Like, any regrets that this wasn't your call, of course, but like to do it, it just seems like a strange way. I've heard many a story on this podcast about the mass layoffs because of format change, and it just seems like the dinner at the Rosewater Supper Club or whatever it's called, like that just seems like a little bit of a stranger way to dismiss somebody. I don't know if you want.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And again, the guidance that I got was book a room at a nice place.
Right. Right.
So for me, I'm like, wow, geez, that must mean the whoever owns the whatever company is going to buy is going to show up and say, hi, hey, we just bought you guys, and blah 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 blah. And so yeah, it was just again, I don't even know what to tell you. That it wasn't. It was like, okay, well, this is a nice restaurant. I'll take it from there.
So now you're in the Rogers family, and again, we won't spend literally. Maybe we'll just say that some markets like, I don't know, Ottawa, Halifax, Moncton, St. John, Kingston, these are all markets where you're kind of involved with Rogers. We won't go too in depth with your Rogers unless we do a sequel, because just since we're over 2 hours and you're now retired from the radio business, but you still advise stations.
Yeah. I mean, super quickly, Rogers, I didn't make the top 40 cut. And then about 3 months later, Chuck McCoy says, we're looking for a manager in Ottawa. Do you want to go? And because Rogers just bought Shea as well. Right. And I said, okay. So then, so I moved to Ottawa in 1999 and had worked for Rogers since 99. Like since, since.
That's like 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It was 20. Yeah. In total. Yeah. And again, part of that was still working for Rogers, still working for the Ottawa cluster out in the Maritimes, like Halifax, Moncton, and St. John. And then I was the GM out there, and then I was the GM of Kingston and the Maritimes. And then my VP here retired in Ottawa, and I took his job over, which was Ottawa, Kingston, Halifax, Moncton, and St. John. So it was a 10-station cluster because we had 5 stations in Ottawa.
Right.
3 Ottawa, 2 Smiths Falls. And so, yeah, I lived happily ever after there, changed responsibilities a few times. They got rid of GMs in the structure and replaced them with national format directors. So I became the national format director for Rock for a couple of years. And it was more fun being the GM of, 10 stations and 3 markets at the time, because but I like the other job as well. And then it was just literally, okay, it's time. And the company was fantastic. And I think I've done everything you need to do to set yourself up, which I advise people to do. Like, no matter what age you're at, like, you are going to get older, you are going to need, a lifestyle. And so stop spending it and start saving it, and if you can. So yeah, it's all good. And then I was keeping busy in the community here with local charities, and I'm also doing some freelance work with another independent company, which has just been a blast. It's been so much fun. Again, when you report to the guy who writes the check, and the guy says, and I say, well, maybe we should do this. He says, go, do it.
Wow. Yeah. That's what it's like. Yeah. TMDS, Danny. Okay. If I have an idea, I can actually just do it. I don't need to run it up the flagpole. So before I play the music, you've been amazing. You're a proud grandpa. You're not very good at retirement because you're still helping out with the, I guess it's the Torres Media stations there in, Good for you. That's amazing. I've loved this. I love the deep dives. So even though Freddie P is not going to hear these words, I'll say I absolutely love getting the details. And then forevermore, I'll remember what Danny Kingsbury told me about that moment. But did you have any questions for me before I play us out?
Well, it'll only take us,
threatened. Sorry.
it'll take us too long, so maybe I'll just ask you on the side. But I was going to, just something to think about. I was going to ask, how I wanted some more details on how you're doing in monetization, because the content is clearly nailed. From what I can see, the monetization looks pretty, I checked the website. I know how, some of that per inquiry stuff works, but yours, you can tell that you're at the 1480, 1484, did you say?
Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, you can tell that, you're not just doing it as a hobby. So I was just quite interested to know that if somebody came along to you and said, I'm going to pay you $100,000 to do this, would you give it all up?
You're going to have to increase that number substantially to get my attention.
Okay, good. I'm delighted to hear that. I just threw that out of the, grabbed that out of the air.
It's a good number to start with, and then we can go.
Yeah.
But here, I would say if you're in the mood one day, I would happily do a sequel where you ask the questions. I would do that with you, Danny, and then you can interview me if you want.
That sounds awesome. I appreciate it. And listen, Mike, it was great. I'm really glad that we eventually got together, and I know there was a mention about me not being interested.
Yeah. Okay. So to clear that up, because you're right, I forgot about that, which is that I guess the lines got before the pandemic. I wanted everybody in person, or I wasn't even going to do it. That's literally how it worked for years. Then, I guess so. Before the pandemic, I'm sure I had an exchange with you to invite you on, and then maybe I misunderstood where you basically explained that you're in Renfrew, and you can't get to the basement. Somehow in my mind with Scott Turner, that became you politely declined, but you never declined. You just said geography's in the way. We're going to have to do it the way we ended up doing it. So I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I am too. I really enjoyed it. It's great. And I don't want your other guests to feel, badly about this. I did appreciate the offer of airfare, hotel at the Ritz, and dinner at the Rosewater for exchange of my time. But
I know what happened at the Rosewater, so forget about it.
But I'm good. I didn't need that. That's fine.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,484th show. You can follow me on Twitter, and I'm on Blue Sky. I'm all over the place, actually, at Toronto Mike. Much love to those who made this possible. That is Great Lakes Brewery. They're hosting TMLX 15 on June 27th from 6 to 9 p.m. So join us for that Toronto Mike listener experience. Palma Pasta, they're going to feed us on June 27 from 6 to 9 p.m. So come hungry, darling. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Raymond James Canada. The Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. Join me on May 12th. Me and Wendell Clark and Stephen Brunt and Rick Emmett and Cam Gordon. What more do you want? Monaris, of course. Yes, We Are Open is the podcast. And Ridley Funeral Home. I'm literally going to record an episode of Toronto Mike with Brad Jones from Ridley Funeral Home. We're going to kick out the 10 most requested funeral songs. See you all then.
And your smile is fine, and it's just like mine.